Good evening and thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Nick Blumberg. Southwest Siders cry out for help after multiple rounds of damaging storms and flooding.
We keep hearing the same question. Why does this keep happening to us?
Officials say climate change is exacerbating already shoddy infrastructure on the city's south and west sides.
I think having an independent commission is a good idea. It has to be done on a national basis, though.
With a new push for independent redistricting underway, Governor J.B. Pritzker says Democrats would be unilaterally disarming themselves if Illinois goes it alone.
Every time we visit this airport and every time we invest in this airport, we invest in jobs, we invest in our neighborhoods.
Officials celebrate groundbreaking for a shiny new O'Hare concourse. Plus, Senator Dick Durbin demands answers about the axing of 17 immigration judges. The RTA eyes stopgap funding to keep buses and trains in service early next year. And a Chicago-based group of pediatricians bucks CDC recommendations urging COVID shots for kids. And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are John Pletz from Crain's Chicago Business, Talia Soglin from the Chicago Tribune, Sophie Sherry from the Chicago Sun-Times, and Michael Puente from WBEZ. Thank you all for being here. Let's get right to it. So we should mention first off tonight, we heard President Donald Trump earlier today musing, not for the first time, that Chicago would probably be the next place he sends in troops as a police force, which many people, including the governor and the mayor, say he has no authority to do. Sophie Sherry, it's not the first time he's mentioned this. Do you think he'll actually go through with it?
We'll see. I mean, I think the mayor is right to, as he said in his statement, take this seriously. We're seeing what's playing out in D.C. I mean, residents are on edge. There's been tense confrontations. The administration's claimed to arrest over 600 people, but we don't know much about those arrests, who's doing the arresting, and I think a lot of those uncertainties should be cause for concern.
Yeah, and you know, we heard the president saying there's all sorts of outcry for this from Chicago residents. I don't know that that's actually borne out, though. That's not something that I feel like the reporting has brought to us.
Right. I don't know if that's what we're hearing on the streets. I think Pritzker doubled down on that in his statement, that that's not what Chicago is asking for. We'll see.
Yeah, I think people will be keeping a very close eye on this. Well, Michael Puente, Chicagoans have gotten slammed with thunderstorms and flooding in recent days, especially, as we mentioned, on the southwest side. Why are some areas facing so much more of this issue than others?
You know, that's a good question, because the deep tunnel project was supposed to alleviate some of this, and we're not really sure why. I mean, it's just a lot of basements. You do just have a lot of old infrastructure, right? But you're getting more and more of these torrential rains. So you have people who, you know, the system just can't handle, I guess, 5 inches to 8 inches of water in just a short period of time. So you've got a lot of basements. People have just lost everything. So they're hoping that the state and the federal government will declare the area a disaster area to get some needed funding, but they're not confident about that.
Yeah, I mean, especially given, you know, Trump's stance towards Chicago, it could make it very difficult to get a federal disaster
Absolutely,
declaration.
right, exactly, because he might put in things like, oh, well, if you're undocumented and immigration status, and, you know, the city wants to help as many people as they can. The state will probably kick in some money with no problem. But on the federal level, it was tough to get money even under the Biden administration. Now you got Trump. It's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, and we heard from, you know, West Siders in Austin that got hit, you know, a couple of years back. You know, it took forever and ever to get the money, so that relief may not be immediately forthcoming.
Exactly, that's right. Because you got to fill out all these surveys. There's a time period in which you have to do it, and they are not. I mean, it's gonna be a long time. Meanwhile, you've got people who lost everything: furniture, clothing, and school supplies.
Yeah, and about the worst time of year to lose those.
That's right.
Well, you know, Talia, we heard that RTA passed a measure this week aimed at delaying service cuts for Chicago area transit. What are the details there?
Yeah, so what the RTA did this week was kind of the last thing it could do to move the fiscal cliff for CTA back at all. CTA was set to hit its cliff before Metra and Pace. So what they did was they took some discretionary money, $74 million, that would have gone to Metra and Pace last year, and they gave it to CTA, with the idea being that pushes serious, catastrophic, really unfathomable service cuts in Chicago next year back 2 or 3 months, so that lawmakers who failed to pass any funding for transit during their spring session can hopefully do it during veto session in October.
Well, how about that, with state lawmakers, John, they're not coming back for a special session to deal with transit. They do say this is, top of their list for the veto session in October. Do we have any good sense of how close they might be to a deal?
Well, Cam Buckner this week, who's one of the co-chairs of that of the working group for transit in the House, said he thinks they're really close. But everybody thought they were really close right after the session ended. The governor also indicated that they think that the veto session is the place this is going to happen. I think one of the things that the RTA's action does is it buys them a little bit more time in terms of exactly when they have to get this done. So everybody seems to be suggesting they think they can get this done over 6 days in 2 weeks in October. We'll see if that happens.
Yeah, over the course of several months they didn't get it done.
Right.
Well, and one of the things that's kind of under discussed there, I think, is that they need 3/5 to pass something that will take effect before June of next year.
Right.
And then even if you pass something, it takes a lot of time, if you have a new tax, a new revenue stream, to actually generate enough dollars.
Right.
And that's something the various transit agencies have been pointing out. And in fact, I think that was the big reason that the RTA did what it did. One of the board members said that without that, even though you might not hit the fiscal cliff with the CTA until 2026, those layoff notices would start going out in December. So they probably don't have as much time as they think. And that may be part of the problem. There was a real discussion among RTA board members that by doing what they did to, kind of stave off the problem, they also, keep kicking the can.
Right.
And perhaps at some point they need to light a fire under the legislators.
Well, of course, there's also the issue that they're going to have to start having public hearings about the potential impact of service cuts. So I would imagine the agencies, they still have to start preparing for those.
They're absolutely preparing for those. And there was also discussion at this meeting about how people aren't going to believe this is real until they know exactly which bus stops, which bus routes, which whole sections of the L are going to go away. So that'll happen during the hearings.
Yeah, that's not anything anybody's looking forward to, I think.
No, but it does change the conversation, and for everybody who's been wondering when is this going to happen, perhaps that's when things happen, is when you're up against the clock and you've got to do it.
Yeah, it's nothing like a deadline to motivate
Right.
people, as journalists well know. Well, speaking of another big fiscal cliff, Michael, CPS students back in school, with more than half the school board calling for some pretty big changes to the budget as proposed. There's a vote on the 29th. Spending authority runs out, or vote on the 28th rather, and then spending authority runs out on the 29th. The mayor said, he thinks there's not going to be a stalemate, there's not going to be a shutdown. Is he projecting confidence, or do we think there's maybe been some movement there?
That's not exactly my area of expertise, so I'm going to leave it to somebody else to answer that.
Well, I mean, you have to think that he's got to, he doesn't want parents and students and families to think that this is just hanging over them without any potential resolution. But, with about half the board opposed, there's clearly got to be some changes in the offing.
Right. I mean, I'm sure it's not ideal, certainly, to start the school year with this $734 million gap. And it seems that we're just keep hitting different climax points. I mean, we had CTU and Pritzker going back and forth this week about, again, if there's going to be any sort of action down in Springfield. I mean, it seems that Pritzker doesn't disagree that there should be, but just that there isn't the means to do that,
Yeah.
Which President Stacey Davis Gates obviously thinks otherwise.
Well, and I think that's part of the problem, is that all of these issues in schools and transit and Medicaid, if they're going to do something about that, it's a lot of different pressures, and they're kind of being put in competition with each other.
CPS, of course, not the only school district that's underfunded by the state's own formula, so we will see where that goes. Well, California lawmakers just passed a congressional remap of their own, trying to counteract Texas's, although that one needs voter approval. Michael, now there's a bipartisan effort underway in Illinois to end gerrymandering of legislative districts for the General Assembly. Right. Do you think there's much of an appetite for that, given how polarized things are right now?
I think there is, because even at that press conference that was led by Bill Daley, they're talking about, even though they want these fair maps under the state legislative districts, they understand why California is going this route, and they feel that Illinois probably would have the right to do it. But let's face it, right now, we got a 14-3 lead of Democrats over Republicans, and those 3 districts, run by pretty popular Republicans. So will they be able to, gerrymander these maps enough to get Democrats in there? It seems like a long shot, especially when you talk about, you're trying to get away from this gerrymandering. But, it may be something that Illinois, California, New York decide to do.
Well, I mean, Governor Pritzker, we heard, said, he's all for ending gerrymandering, but it has to be done nationwide. Otherwise, Democrats are kind of putting themselves on the back foot. Is that a fair way to describe it?
That's right. That's right. If they're saying that if Texas is not going to play fair, then Democrats have no recourse than to reciprocate on that. But California is going to have a tough time to do it too. I mean, they passed it. The voters still have to approve it. Illinois, it's also very expensive to do that. Call a special session, whatever you want to do. Then where are the voters in all this? The voters should be the ones who are selecting their elected officials. So they just may lose confidence in the entire system. And if that happens, maybe you'll see even lower voter turnout.
Which is already not stellar.
Right.
Well, Sophie, we saw a top lieutenant in Cook County State's Attorney Eileen O'Neill Burke's office leave after just 8 months. Tell us about that. Was that an expected move?
Yeah, right. A bit of a shakeup in the office there. Burke says it was an expected move. She said she brought in her top aide, her first assistant state's attorney, Anna Demokopoulos, to help sort of right the ship for the start of her tenure, and that it was always their understanding that she would leave once that work had been done. And as of Monday, Burke says those necessary restructurings have been completed, so Demokopoulos is returning to private practice.
And what do we know about her successor?
Her successor, Craig Engelbretson, comes to the office. He's also a 20-year veteran and most recently served as the chief of the Juvenile Justice Bureau over there. So similar, Demokopoulos came in with obviously a ton of experience in and around that courthouse, 15 years as a judge, 20 as a prosecutor, but a similar veteran of the office stepping up to that top post.
Yeah, clearly someone who knows their way around the hallways there. Well, we also heard this week O'Neill Burke was celebrating that Governor Pritzker signed into law a measure that she had pushed for nonviolent low-level gun cases, kind of a diversion program. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, this was a measure championed by her office, also supported by state police and the Cook County Public Defenders, and it aims to make it easier for a certain group to get those licenses to legally own firearms. And as you mentioned, this measure is going to apply to first-time nonviolent offenders who are facing that lowest level of gun possession charges. And they'll be able to apply for a FOID card while completing a court-approved diversion program, and hopefully, if meeting all other requirements, receive that card upon completion.
Well, John, construction finally underway on a new O'Hare concourse, adding 19 additional gates. First announced back in 2018. Any idea what took so long here?
It's been a while. Well, a couple of things. They needed to do some work on Terminal 5 before because some people were moving from one terminal to another. You had a pandemic in there.
Oh yeah, I remember that one. Yeah,
which pretty much brought air travel to a halt. And then you also had a real discussion coming out of the pandemic between the airlines and the city about what was going to get built when. So all that together, yeah, you get several years down the road. The good news is that this is the first of 3 major projects that are part of this overhaul at O'Hare, and I think people were pretty eager. The airlines, certainly Scott Kirby, the mayor, and everybody else watching this was, I think, pretty happy to see it start to move forward. There, you really won't see the major work going on until next year. The above ground work, there's a lot of work going on sort of behind the scenes or underground this year.
Talia, as John just mentioned, this big $8.2 billion redevelopment program at the airport. Who's footing the bill for that?
The airlines are paying for a lot of it, and that was part of the conflict, is this fear, that they were going to run out of money basically before they could build the beautiful, main Genie Gang terminal. So they ended up, they're building Concourse D first, and then they can start on the global terminal in phases.
Yeah, and what are some of the major pieces there that we're looking for in terms of the redevelopment, some of the upgrades?
If you've seen the renderings, I mean, they're pretty. I don't think we've seen updated renderings.
Not of the global terminal.
Yeah.
We got another look at what what seems to be the final drawings for Concourse D. What was previously known as the satellite terminal next to Terminal 1, and they are striking. They really are. What we haven't seen are any updated looks at the biggest part of that project, which is the global terminal. It replaces Terminal 2 that connects United and American's terminals. We still don't really know what that looks like, so we're told it's TBD. On the cost side, one of the interesting questions will be whether they build the second satellite, Concourse E. The airlines were pretty firm that they said, well, if there's money when all this is over, great, build it. The city was very clear this week that they said, we're building it no matter what. We are going to build it. We'll keep it on budget. It's going to happen. And
we heard a lot as well from Mayor Johnson that they expect this to be a fairly big revenue generator.
Yeah, they do. And I think what will be really interesting, though, is exactly what you were saying about the budget. They said, we've realized these cost savings and kind of utility systems, so things like heating and cooling and stormwater systems. But this is, going back to these discussions, is there was, some reporting last year, maybe they're 1.5 billion, 2 billion over budget. And if they've done that, and then what impact that would have on the final.
And the other issue in terms of building that last piece, the last satellite, they're going to need the gates. You're adding 19 new gates with one concourse. You add another 24 with the second concourse. At some point, Terminal 2 is 40 odd gates that they're replacing. You may very well need those extra gates at some point.
Yeah, because nobody likes an O'Hare delay, and they are not shy about being vocal when it happens. Well, Michael, we heard from Senator Dick Durbin this week demanding some answers from Attorney General Pam Bondi about 17 immigration judges who were fired. And of course, because of the way the system is structured, the DOJ does oversee those judges and can fire them. What's Durbin looking for here? Do you think he's really expecting much from an attorney general who's also not a big fan of Illinois?
Well, I think he's seeing that there's politics in play. They want to put pressure on there. I mean, there should be some semblance of fairness when you go to these immigration courts, right? And the judges are supposed to be there, even though they are employed by the Justice Department, i.e. the Trump administration. You should feel like you're getting a fair shake. And we're seeing some of the judges who are pushing back on having some of these clients show up and getting arrested right then and there when they're obligated to show up in court. I've talked to attorneys who worked in the immigration court, even a former immigration judge I've had a chance to speak with. So they're feeling the pressure to almost bypass due process. And I think Durbin just wants to put some of the pressure on there that this is not happening in a vacuum. This is very real that the Justice Department is pushing out judges.
And we've heard from some of those judges as well who are saying, I wasn't given cause for my firing, or this was, some of them are pushing to get their jobs back. Is that right? Absolutely.
All right. I mean, there's some issues there with clients who it's a very convoluted, complicated process. When some of these defendants go in there, they're scared, they're worried. Some of them are trying to do it by video phone. But when they go in there, they're playing everything by the book. People say, well, you got to do it by the right way to come inside the United States. Well, a lot of them are doing that right, and they're finding themselves being arrested. And some of the judges are pushing back on that. So they're not taking the directives by the Trump administration or Pam Bondi to do it a certain way. So that's why a lot of them are facing firing.
Yeah. Well, Sophie, we heard this week, got the autopsy results from Officer Crystal Rivera, who was accidentally shot and killed on the job. What did we learn there?
Yeah, well, we learned, as some may have assumed, that bullet struck her in the back and became lodged in her torso. As you mentioned, we know that bullet came from her partner. The two were pursuing a man into an apartment building when they encountered another man with a rifle. This is the first Chicago police officer shot by a fellow officer in nearly 40 years. And although we have the autopsy results, there's still a lot of unanswered questions that remain. family attorneys specifically have been asking for greater transparency throughout the process and have raised concerns about biases in the investigation.
And of course, we saw the officer who fired on her stripped of his police powers for an unrelated incident. So you have to imagine there's a lot of frustration with the family there at the process.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's just added. I mean, they were already calling for greater action from CPD. Obviously, he was stripped for an somewhat unrelated incident. But yeah, still calls from them to be more included in this process and have greater accountability from the CPD leadership.
Well, John, there was a report out about the high environmental costs of these massive data centers springing up to support the booming AI industry, really warning that they could deplete water supplies. What are the concerns there?
Well, the issue is that they may use as much water almost as electricity. I think people are well aware of the electricity being used by data centers. What you've heard less about is the water, and as the data centers get bigger, the question is, how much water are you going to pull? What's happening, though, is that the data centers are getting much more efficient. They're getting bigger, but the companies building them are also have a real focus on trying to cut down on not only the electricity usage, but also the water usage. But it gives you it's one more thing to think about as states like Illinois look at just how many of these do you want to attract, because the electricity issue that we've all seen is a real strain. And now you've also got to think about the water resources. It gives you a lot to think about, of saying, do you really want to bet that heavy on data centers as an economic development tool?
Well, and one of the things that I saw in some of the reporting is that it can be hard to find out exactly how much water they're using, because some of them have confidentiality agreements with municipalities. Does that sound like particularly good governance if you're kind of giving away the store to try and attract them?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the problems, is you don't really know how much water they're using. And to be fair, some of the systems that are used in data centers are closed loop systems. It's not like you're constantly drawing a ton of water in and pushing it back out. But this has been an economic development question for a long time, whether it was steel mills, refineries, manufacturing facilities, battery plants, take your pick. Mm-hmm. That's always a concern. It's something that you need to think about, but people are now starting to highlight it in the very same way that we started talking about the energy usage of data centers, in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, kind of a catch-22 there. Well, Talia, a national group of pediatricians based here in Chicago, they're going against rewritten federal guidelines and recommending COVID vaccinations for children. How confusing is all this conflicting guidance for parents, or do you think most folks just kind of have their mind made up one way or another?
I mean, I would guess so. I feel like if you look to history and to science, we know that vaccines are good and prevent children from dying. So I wasn't surprised to see that come from a group of doctors. But I don't know, in terms of a personal decision. It seems like people get pretty locked in.
Yeah, but I mean, do you have to think with the Trump administration, pulling back on a lot of this sort of established science, do you imagine we might see more and more of these sort of, organizations, medical organizations coming out and trying to countermand some of that?
Absolutely, Nick. I mean, it's very confusing, especially if you're a parent of small children. You want to get the right information on there, but it's just been a drastic pullback by this administration on all kind of vaccines and cancer research and medical research. You're not knowing where is this going, how is this making America great again. So it's leaving parents who are already very scared about giving anything to their children. Now they're confused on this. So it's tough for them.
Well, you did not confuse us. You were a great panel, but that is all the time that we have for tonight. So our thanks to John Pletz, Talia Soglin, Sophie Sherry, and Michael Puente. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation. Additional support is provided by
And that's our show for this Friday night. You can stream the Week in Review and Chicago Tonight on our WTTW YouTube channel every evening and catch up on any programs you may have missed. Now for the Week in Review, I'm Nick Blumberg. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and stay informed. Have a great weekend. All right, well, City Council Committee, they have launched a survey on everybody's piece of city life, and that is, of course, speed cameras. What do you think they're looking to learn there? You think they're going to get an earful on this?
Yes.
You have to imagine that no one wants to see more of these, but you know, the argument that I've heard from older people is that this is a fair way to try and reduce people's speeds on the roads. But do you think that argument necessarily breaks through?
No, crowdsourcing speed cameras is an interesting approach.
Yeah, and you have to see that there's going to be a lot of people that say, this is okay, just don't put it on my block, please.
Not in my backyard.
Yeah, exactly.
I would love to see some of those survey results from there.
They might get some salty answers to that. Okay, we also heard this week, speaking of speeding, NASCAR will be back, but they will be in Joliet. Why the heck didn't they just go there in the first place instead of shutting down downtown?
It does seem like an awfully long, expensive journey to get right back where they started.
Yeah. Anybody excited? Anybody planning to check out the races when they're down?
I'm probably one of the few people who actually enjoyed the street race downtown Chicago. I don't live down there, so I didn't feel the disruption. I thought it was a cool experience. But I think what it shows for NASCAR is that there is a strong market for NASCAR, for auto racing in the Chicagoland area.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that contributes to public safety policy and guidelines.